Hello everybody, I hope everybody's feeling healthy and safe out there. First I just wanted to apologize that I don't have a webcam. I have a newer computer and I got a custom monitor and I did not get a webcam, so I apologize about that. My project is titled Climate Change in the United States, a mix of skepticism, denial, and fact, and I included this picture on the title slide because I thought it was a very deep image to sum up climate change and global warming and that whole concept in one image. So, alright. Climate change, like it says, is the changing of the climates due to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This can have negative effects on the environment, such as increased global temperatures, increase in sea level, and also an increase in the intensity of tropical storms. This is obviously an issue because we as a society need to adapt in order to have a sustainable future where we can continue to utilize resources. However, as you'll notice on the quotes that I provided on this slide from NASA, you'll see a lot of words like projections or models or trends. These are all words that kind of have question marks at the end of them when it comes to data, and this in turn leaves a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty can arise when it comes to climate change in a few ways. One is the data that's being presented credible? Is it from a trustworthy source? Is it from a government agency or is it from a private agency? The source of the data matters. In this map that I found, it's from the National Climate Assessment. It's a credible source. However, it's a projection, and a projection in itself is not something that's set in stone. If you look at the northern part of the country up here, it says this could increase by 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit between 2071 and 2099. It could increase more. It could increase less. Projections, like I said, are not set in stone, so there is uncertainty in the information from climate change, and this creates a lot of question when it's being digested by the public. Also, I have out of sight, out of mind up there because a lot of the general public doesn't see climate change. So for them to have all these studies and facts come out that the temperature is going to increase drastically and the sea levels are going to increase and all those drastic measures, them not seeing it on a daily basis or not seeing any kind of signs that exhibit that information to them makes it all more surreal and drastic and potentially not true. So the fact that it's out of sight, out of mind also causes uncertainty within the information of climate change. This uncertainty in this question therefore leads to what I believe are three different types of climate change perspectives in America of essentially accepting or not the fact of climate change. You either accept it, like most of us do in our class, I would assume. You can be skeptical of it, skeptical of different scenarios, the magnitude, the time frame in which it's going to occur, things of those nature, or you can just flat out deny it. Two common perceptions of climate change in America are skepticism and denial. They are very different in that skepticism always asks why. They still acknowledge some truth to the situation, but still question or disbelieve certain aspects of it, as where denial is a flat-out refusal of the situation regardless of the proof. The sayings that I included for each perception I thought were good examples. As for the skepticism, it won't affect me, it's not as bad as they say it is, it's cyclical. They still all semi-acknowledge the fact that climate change exists, except they downplay its magnitude. As where the denial, it's a loss of freedom. Things are good now. I've been doing this for years. They have reasons of burden to absolute deny the fact that climate change even exists, or the fact that they've been doing something for so long that there's no possible way that what they're doing could have any possible negative effect. Climate change perception ethics include utilitarianism, praetorianism, care ethics, and virtue ethics. Utilitarian mindsets view everything as the greatest good for the greatest number of people, so essentially maximizing resources for the most potential. As where prioritarianism views that the higher value is for the less to benefit, therefore future societies will be better off, therefore we have more of a value now utilizing resources. Virtue ethics usually deal with tradition that may involve exploiting resources, such as native tribes that could overfish certain areas because they have for so many years. This would contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and also provide for climate change effects. Other forms of virtue ethics could be by using resources and committing to climate change. We're using goods for our own well-being now as opposed to in the future. Lastly is care ethics, which instills value into objects or people and makes us want to do things to replenish that value and to have a reciprocating effect. So essentially why we should care about the environment. Care ethics comes into play into why we should care about climate change and why we should care about trying to mitigate that climate change and slow it down. Ways people will care about climate change is if they can see examples of climate change. If they can see something with their own eyes, they may, like I said before, not have that out of sight, out of mind effect. Two examples of climate change that I chose to look at a little further were Hurricane Sandy, which happened in 2012, and the increasing ice melt that's been happening to our glaciers. Hurricane Sandy is an example of climate change in that it was a tropical storm that was highly accelerated its magnitude due to the increased air currents that unusually occurred during that coastal summer hurricane season in 2012. Some studies suggest that if Hurricane Sandy had occurred 100 years prior, the same unusual hot jet streams wouldn't have occurred due to the increase of climate change effects in the past 100 years. Glacial ice melt is a very visible form of climate change, and the fact that glacial ice sheets have been disappearing for the past 100 years due to increased air temperatures. Glacial water being melted is actually a double whammy in the sense that glacial ice water is fresh water. So the fact that it is being introduced into the oceans, which increases the sea levels, is also a loss because we are losing freshwater resources that were otherwise untapped. Some climate change policies include the following. A lot of these were put into effect in the 70s, back when the environmental movement was happening, and a couple more have been recently. The Kyoto Protocol happened in the 90s, and the most recent one was the Paris Agreement Act, which happened in the Obama administration, but is having some conflict now with the current Trump administration. The Kyoto Protocol, which was signed in Japan, assigned certain limits to nations for how much greenhouse gas emissions they could emit. Where the newer Paris Agreement not only took into account greenhouse gas emissions thresholds, but also set a goal of 2 degrees Celsius increase in annual average air temperatures. The effectiveness of the Kyoto Protocol at the time was extremely effective, and it was kind of groundbreaking in the sense of the environmental movement. But since then it has been kind of politically antiquated in the sense that the Kyoto Protocol never really established some kind of authority when it came to countries overpolluting their threshold of greenhouse gas emissions, as where the stricter Paris Agreement takes away that free rider mentality. The Paris Agreement has potential to be extremely effective if it can have nations that are the higher polluters on board with the agreement. One of those nations is the United States. However, the current Trump administration has promised to withdraw from the agreement, which could possibly limit the effectiveness of the agreement itself. In order to get more nations and more global consensus to take climate change seriously, we have to change the overall perception of climate change with ethical environmental care. In order to establish a global consensus of care, we must have to get people to want to care, to want to change, and to want to do something to help slow the spread of climate change. We have to establish the mentality of the fact that we use the resources from the earth. So therefore, in order to have a sustainable future, we have to also care about that earth, because without it, we wouldn't have the resources to survive. Essentially, to care about the future of the environment is to care about the sustainability of the benefits that the environment possesses. Ethical care and the care for the environment is the foundation for trying to change the perception of climate change and change the perception of skeptics and deniers of climate change to want to also get on board to help the movement. A potential augmentation that I would have to a certain policy, like the Paris Agreement, could be to globally mandate that every nation needs to abide by these standards. I understand that's a far-fetched law to try to get every nation to be globally mandated to something, because there will probably never be global consensus on anything. However, I feel like when it's a global issue, you need to have global consensus, because if only a couple countries are committing to a Paris Agreement or a Kyoto Protocol, it's really not going to get anything done until you have the entire team on board. Another augmentation I would have would be to add other national standards to abide by other greenhouse gases and temperature, such as plastic waste, oil consumption, and freshwater contamination. I would add these standards to the Paris Agreement because plastic waste is also a huge contributor to greenhouse gases. It's also a huge contributor to ocean pollution, and oil consumption is also a huge contributor to greenhouse gases. So I think it should have some kind of mandate also into the Paris Agreement. Lastly, like we learned in the assigned reading a couple weeks ago, geoengineering I think is a huge potential. It has the potential to allow for jobs to open up the economy and allow for economic benefits as a society, but it also has a possibility to lower the spread of climate change and the rate at which it's increasing. The picture that I provided on the right shows a couple examples of different geoengineering solutions, and I think it's actually a very interesting idea to pursue, and I think it would be a very interesting way to incorporate it into the Paris Agreement to allow for different nations to get together and explore these opportunities of geoengineering. Thanks for watching my presentation, everybody. I hope it was clear and concise. Like always, if you have any questions or comments or critiques, please leave them below in the comment section. I'll be happy to clear up any confusion that I may have presented in my project. I tried to keep it as concise as I possibly could and explain it the best I possibly could, but sometimes I am better at explaining and writing than I am with slides or PowerPoints or public speaking. So thanks once again, stay safe, and here's my works cited just so you guys can get a quick glimpse at that before I end this video.